Welcome back, everybody, to another Kuta software worksheet tutorial. Today we're doing compound inequalities. A lot of students find this pretty difficult, so let's try to break this down into the simplest steps possible. Now, inequalities by themselves, people kind of find difficulty, but now we have compound, we have more than one that we're talking about, and we have to decide how we're going to graph each one. Whether or not you have an OR statement or an AND statement. I don't know why there's a plus sign here, but I think that means AND. I don't think that's what it's trying to say is AND. You still have to follow the same process. So at least for the first couple of steps. So the first step is you need to solve for variable in each inequality. So we have two inequalities here. Let me change the color. We have one here and we have one here. So we need to solve for both. Let's go ahead and show that. When you have inequalities like this, it's essentially like solving for an equation with an equal sign, but the only difference is if you multiply or divide by a negative, you are going to flip the sign. That's the only difference. You need to keep that in mind as you solve these problems. Otherwise, it's essentially just the same as an equal sign. So here we're going to isolate the m by doing the opposite operation, add 2 to both sides, and we get m is less than -6. So now we have one option. Now I'm going to move on to the second one before I start the graphing. Okay, but the second one we have m over 8. This one's simple enough. We just have to do the opposite operation. So instead of dividing by 8, we multiply it by 8, and we get m is greater than 8. Okay, now, for all those of you that are in high school and your teacher is telling you to use, let me show you. For your teacher showing you to use open dots or open circles for less than or greater than, and then closed dots for less than or equal to or greater than or equal to, that's great. I'm going to be showing the college way, which is parentheses for less than greater than and brackets for greater than or equal to. So just keep that in mind that I'm doing it with the lens of the latter, not the former. So let me change the color so you guys can see it. Stands out. Does that stand out though? Not loving it, not loving it. There we go. Loving it. Okay. So just keep this in mind. I'll use it. Look at this. We got a little contrast going, a little dark green. Perfect. Okay. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to graph each of these. So I'm going to graph this guy, and I'm going to graph this guy. When you have an OR, we're talking about is it can be this one, or it can be that one. So if it can be either or, that means we have to graph both of them at the same time. Now, if there's overlap, we have to factor in the overlap, and we have to include all the quantities, of both of these. We want all quantities of both, because either one can satisfy all quantities of both. So you don't just want to graph one, you don't want to graph the smaller of the overlap, you want to graph as many values as possible that are demonstrated in this one or in this one, okay? That's what OR means. So let's go ahead and show that. We're going to start at -6, okay? Now, with -6, are we talking about the values smaller or bigger? We're talking about the values smaller. Numbers like -10 will satisfy it, -12, so we know we're going to the left. So we're starting at -6 right here, and we're going to be going to the left. Now, why did I use a parenthesis? Because it can't include -6. Historically, you guys have used open dots, but now we're using parentheses to show it can't be equal to -6. Now we're talking about the values bigger than 8. So it can't be equal to 8. We're going to use parentheses, and the values bigger than 8 are 10, 12, 13, 100. So we're going to graph to the right, and this is at 8. Okay? So our graph is done. This is what it looks like. Okay, we graphed the values of both. Sorry, I cut off that arrow, but you get the point. Okay, so that's an OR. Let's do an AND. So now we have AND. Let's switch colors. Let's go blue. So now we have an AND. What does this mean? Well, the first step applies. Oh, I forgot to do step 2. So step 2, for OR, you graph both. Okay. You might have to interpret it if there's some overlap because you're going to try to include all values. Include all values. If they double up, that's fine, but you need to include all the values. And what are we doing with that? Well, I'll get to that in just a second. No, I'm going to write it just so I don't have to go back. So and is the overlap. Okay, so let's talk about that in just a moment. So we have this problem. We're doing and I said I'm doing blue. I'm going to stick with it. We have x plus 8. We have to solve first. No matter what step we're doing, we're going to solve first. And I have a section on notes, 1.6, Advanced Topics with Mr. West, section 1.6, if you want further explanation of and or. Or and or. Okay, you guys get what I'm saying. So we're going to subtract 8 from both sides first, get the x by itself. We get x is greater than or equal to 1. Still got to do it over here, multiply, opposite operation. X is less than or equal to 7. Okay, now I'm going to kind of graph lightly first because it might need to change. So we're going to use brackets. We're not going to use the closed dot. We're going to use a bracket for these guys. Which way does it go? If we're talking about 1, okay, and we're talking about the values bigger than 1, we're talking about 2, 3, 4. This is to the right. We're going to be graphing to the right here. Okay, so let's start there. We're going to graph the 1, okay, and we're graphing to the right. Now, I do this lightly because we might need to change it. Notice how I'm not going all the way to the right and being super emphatic with it, okay? I'm eventually going to have to change this a little bit, so I'm just starting it. I'm drawing a little arrow. I can even draw it smaller. I'm drawing a little arrow just because it's going to change a little bit, or we're going to have to do some modifications because it's and. We're talking about the overlap between this guy and this guy. Okay, where do values fall into both categories? Now let's talk about x is less than or equal to 7. Okay, so we're at 7. We're talking about the value smaller, so 0, -1, 2, 5, 6, or 7 because it can be equal to. So we're going to go to the left. So we're going to go this way. Okay, now let's think for a second which values are not in this one and they are not in this one, okay? So we need values that don't fit into either one of these categories. Well, what is something, well, for example, I'm sorry, I went about this the wrong way. We want to find values that are in both categories. That's probably a better way to think of it. And as you can see, these arrows are going to link up. I'm going to get to what I was talking about in just a second. These arrows link up in the middle. Okay, but you can't go past the little border bracket that you have, okay? Don't go this way and don't go that way. Why? Well, let me show you why. Now, this is what I was going to get into, and I kind of mistimed it, but bear with me. Okay, so these values that I just graphed here in this area all satisfy both inequalities. They satisfy this one and they satisfy that one. Why? Well, is 7 less than or equal to 7? Yes. Is 7 bigger than 1? Yes. So we have check, check. What about the number 3? Is 3 less than or equal to 7? Yes. Check. Is 3 greater than or equal to 1? Yes. Check, check. Okay? You see that these values inside here all satisfy. Now, what about this orange value? Let's do some orange values. What about 8? Is 8 greater or less than or equal to -7? Or excuse me, not -7, 7. It is not. Even though 8 satisfies 8 is bigger than or equal to 1, it does not satisfy this one, therefore it can't be included. And the same goes for 0. If we try 0, yeah, 0 satisfies, 0 is less than or equal to 7, but 0 is not bigger than or equal to 1, so we can't include it. So these values in the fringe cannot be included because they have to satisfy both for and. So with and, we are looking for overlap, and we're looking for where both inequalities have those values, okay? So that's the way to think of those. They have to satisfy both inequalities. Satisfy both inequalities at same time. Okay, it's different from this one because, and you look in the first example, okay, little problem here. Okay, if we look in the first problem here, a number like 0, obviously 0 doesn't satisfy either one, but in the number 9, it satisfies 1, but it doesn't satisfy the other inequality, as you can see here. But that's okay because we're looking for or. Only one of them needs to be satisfied if we're going to graph both of them. We just need to see one of the values satisfied, okay? Now, let's go to number 5. You're looking at this and you're like, what? This isn't like, it doesn't say and or. This is essentially and. If you see it sandwiched between two values like this, you have a sandwich, that means it's an and, okay? So what you got to do is don't be afraid of this compound inequality. What you're going to do is you're going to separate it out into two little chunks. You're going to separate it out into this guy and you're going to separate it out into this guy. And then you just solve from there. So we're going to do what we normally do. We're multiply it by 2 to both sides. We get negative 6 less than or equal to p. We multiply by 2 to both sides here. We get p is less than 0. Okay, so we have two inequalities. Just split this up. Don't be afraid, okay? Just split that up, and you got to include the and. That's what this one means. So we're going to look for the overlap. Okay, so we're going to graph both. We're going to use a bracket for the first one. It's got to be bigger than negative 6. Boom, bracket on negative 6. And we're talking about bigger than that. Then we're going to look at 0. It can't include 0. We're going to put parenthesis, and the value is less than 0. Okay, where are they going to meet up? They're going to meet in the middle. Okay, so we're going to graph this in the middle. There's our solution. These ones are straightforward. It's just it looks like it's tough, but it's just some two-step equations. And all the rest are kind of like that. Again, you have one in the middle here. This is an and you're going to want to split this up into 2. Negative 36 less than 3p minus 6. And you're going to want to split this. 3p minus 6 is less than negative 15. But all these other ones are going to be fairly straightforward. I want to keep this a little bit short so you guys can kind of get started. But I did 3 of them with you and started a 4th one. Hope you found this helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Wes Explains Best.